Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be talking about the film Priscilla, directed by Sofia Coppola. I came across this via, unfortunately, Cosmopolitan on Twitter and then found a more detailed article by Variety, and that's the article that we're going to be talking about today, where there has been some controversy inside the film production, quote unquote, and I'll get into that because there's definitely controversy outside of it. Let's talk about what the people actually inside the story had to say about this. Lisa Marie Presley slammed Sofia Coppola's Priscilla script as vengeful and contemptuous for Elvis' depiction before she died. Before her death earlier this year, Lisa Marie Presley expressed shock and horror over the depiction of her father, Elvis Presley, in the script for Sofia Coppola's new film, Priscilla. Described in two emails obtained exclusively by Variety, the late Presley asked Coppola to reconsider her vision for the character and to spare her family public embarrassment. The messages were sent 4 months before Presley suffered fatal cardiac arrest in January. Presley's messages called the script shockingly vengeful and contemptuous and contained pleas to Oscar-winning director Coppola to refrain from straining her fragile relationship with her mother, the film's subject, Priscilla Presley, as well as bringing scrutiny on Elvis' living grandchildren as they continue to grieve the loss of Lisa Marie Presley's son, Benjamin, who died in 2020. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second. I can definitely understand this take, and I think that as a mother, being concerned specifically for Elvis's grandchildren, I think that's most likely, as an outsider, I would assume that that is the biggest concern, right? For any parent, their biggest concern is probably how their children are going to deal with something like this, especially when they probably have already dealt, even prior to any film, with a level of scrutiny that most children slash adults slash however old they are now should not be dealing with, right? That's not a quote unquote normal childhood, and I think that's a childhood that's already probably been invaded in a lot of ways, since we know a lot of journalists, a lot of tabloids have no sense of morality. That is a different story. Priscilla is a biopic of Priscilla Presley based on the subject's 1985 memoir, Elvis and Me. It has sparked conversation amongst critics and audiences for its portrait of Elvis and Priscilla's courtship, one that began in Germany in 1959 when Priscilla was 14 and Elvis was 24. Honestly, as cut and dry as this sounds, once you say that a courtship started when one of the people was 14 and the other was 24, for a lot of people that is a case closed. For a lot of people, they will not see an argument there to be made. I am going to listen to this argument, but for me, that would be a case closed. If you have one kid who has just started high school, basically, and the person that's courting them, that's dating them, whatever, has finished college, putting aside the morality and ethics of it, which I think it's creepy as fuck, but moving on from that, what do we think these people have to talk about? That's the thing that I don't understand, because when I make this argument with a lot of people, the morality and the ethics thing, people will say it's a different time, and granted, it was a different time. Granted, what was accepted societally was different. That doesn't mean it was right, first of all. And second of all, it's like, when I ask these people, okay, what do these people have in common? What were they talking about? As much as a 10-year age gap may not be a big deal in some relationships, like in some friendships, in relationships later on in life, a 10-year age gap when you're 14 and 24 is massive. My father only comes across as a predator and manipulative. As his daughter, I don't read this and see any of my father in this character. I don't read this and see my mother's perspective of my father. I read this and see her shockingly vengeful and contemptuous perspective, and I don't understand why, Presley wrote in one of her messages. Both were sent in September of last year, roughly 4 hours apart. While Coppola had yet to roll cameras on Priscilla when Presley reached out, the latter told her bluntly that she would speak out against the project, and her mother, who is credited as an executive producer and has participated in publicity for the A24 release. Already an awards season contender, the movie opened in limited release on October 27 and expands wide on Friday. I will be forced to be in a position where I will have to openly say how I feel about the film and go against you, my mother, and this film publicly, Presley wrote. Quote, when I asked for comment on the exchange, Coppola responded through her representative with words she expressed to Presley in response to her September emails, saying it encapsulates what the director intended to do with her film. I hope when you see the final film, you will feel differently and understand I'm taking great care in honoring your mother while also presenting your father with sensitivity and complexity, wrote Coppola. Priscilla Presley was not immediately reachable for comment. A24, which is distributing Priscilla domestically and did not produce the project, declined to comment. An insider close to the film said the exchanges were made on September 2nd, 2022, only weeks away from starting production on Priscilla. The source said the film is exclusively based on Elvis and Me, and efforts were made to tone down some elements of the book regarding the couple's courtship that would have been shocking to contemporary audiences. Coppola's goal was to tell a love story, the insider said, with the primary tension of the film being Priscilla's struggles to adapt to life with a global superstar. Lisa Marie Presley is believed to have seen an early draft of the script, said the source, which eventually was trimmed by about 10 pages when principal photography started on October 24th, 2022. An interesting question came to mind while I was thinking about all this, right? Because the movie is based on the book. Okay, so the original source material is from Priscilla, who lived this. I think the fact that Coppola based the movie on the book that was written by someone who was in the story, the main character of the story, actually, aside from Elvis, is an important thing that we don't lose sight of, because I think, generally speaking, when a movie is made from an outsider with only their outside perspective, and then someone who's related to whatever the movie's on, whether it's a family member, whatever, reaches out and is like, hey, this is incorrect, the majority of us fall on the family's side, being like, hey, the family knows what happened, we don't, so on and so forth. This case is particularly complicated because it's not only based on the book, but Presley was also involved in the making of the movie, in which case we have a tension here because we have the daughter and the actual person who lived this, and at that point, as an outsider, obviously you can take a side, but it becomes a billion times more complicated because it's two people inside the same story who have a very different perspective and a very different way of viewing how this all should be represented. That being said, since it is based on the book, and since they do have someone from the family who is like, yes, this is what I lived, this is what I experienced, it becomes even more complicated with Coppola's quote saying that they represented Elvis with complexity and sensitivity, I believe it was, which also leads me to ask, where do we keep the journalistic integrity? Because obviously, nobody wants to make a movie shitting on a big superstar when some other family is still alive, right? And I'm not saying that's what the movie's doing, but I'm just saying nobody wants to hurt the family members who are innocent just to hurt them, right? But then there's a level of journalistic integrity where it's like, okay, if Priscilla was 14 and he was 24, that is something that people will not get over, but that is also something you can't gloss over. So where do we draw the line between being sensitive, which I do think you should be to an adequate degree, which is really what we're discussing here, where that line is, and keeping the facts there? Because he comes off as a predator because of these straight up facts that we can't just leave out of the story. So as much as I understand not wanting to be gratuitously mean or gratuitously cruel, it's also like, okay, but these were the ages. There's no real point, in my opinion, of telling a story if from the get it's going to be super biased. Now, every story is biased to a degree, but I really don't see the point of telling a story if from the get-go you're going to be asked to remove significant parts of the story, which we might call details like ages, but that really frame the story, right? Because if they'd met when they were both 24, this would be a very different story, because it's not just Priscilla being in the limelight with this massive celebrity, it's her being in the limelight with a massive celebrity when she was not yet an adult, which also changes the stories. I'm wondering how Lisa Marie Presley wanted this to be displayed, because I don't think there's any way that this will get away without judgment. Priscilla was an official selection of this year's Venice Film Festival. It premiered to glowing notices and won its star Kaylee Spaney a Best Actress prize. Both media outlets and viewers have taken note of the age gap and power dynamic between the on-screen Elvis, portrayed by Euphoria star Jacob Elordi, and Priscilla. The project showcases the attrition by which psychological abuse wears partners down, wrote one critic. Fans on social media have accused Elvis of grooming his eventual bride. Most reviews found the film in line with Coppola's vaunted filmography and largely a story about a young woman's life in a gilded cage. Rolling Stone published an interview with Coppola on October 24th with the headline, "Is Elvis Presley a monster in Priscilla? Sofia Coppola wants you to judge for yourself." Lisa Marie Presley was doubtful that her mother Priscilla would understand a modern translation of her experience. "I'm worried that my mother isn't seeing the nuance here or realizing the way in which Elvis will be perceived when this movie comes out," Lisa Marie Presley wrote in her emails. "I feel protective over my mother, who has spent her whole life elevating my father's legacy. I'm worried she doesn't understand the intentions behind this film or the outcome it will have." Lisa Marie Presley also seemed to appeal to Coppola's own Hollywood legacy. "I would think of all people that you would understand how this would feel," she wrote, alluding to Coppola's famous family, which includes her father, The Godfather directed Francis Ford Coppola. "Why are you coming for my dad and my family?" The same insider familiar with Lisa Marie Presley said her communications with Coppola were shared with Priscilla Presley, as well as Lisa Marie Presley's daughter, the actor Riley Keough. "Coppola has trodden lightly when it comes to questions about the age difference between Elvis and Priscilla. I try not to be judgmental of any of the characters and really be as sympathetic as I can to each of them, and I'm really focused on her perspective. But even with the parents, you're like, how can anybody let their kid go live with Elvis that young?" she told Rolling Stone this month. Priscilla Presley, making the press rounds in Venice and in subsequent interviews, has clarified that she and Elvis were not sexually intimate when she was 14. The matriarch has also said multiple times that she loves the film. The emails reveal the specific struggle that Hollywood must contend with when creating art around legacies of icons like Elvis. Estates representing large stars often wade into disputes around adapted content. Elvis Presley Enterprises, which represents the trust of the Viva Las Vegas star's physical estate, Graceland, denied Priscilla from using his music catalog for the film. The emails also reflect what was personally at stake for Lisa Marie Presley. "Sophia, there's one more thing I'd like to add," Presley concluded her second note to Coppola. She shared an anecdote about one of her young twins, Harper Lockwood, who was sent a trade announcement about Priscilla going into production. "I had to explain that we're going to have to endure another hit in our lives, that there's going to be a movie about her grandfather that is going to try and make him look really, really bad, but it's not true. I had to explain to her that her beloved grandmother is supporting it. These two little girls have been through so much in the past 7 years, enduring my divorce and horrific custody battle, then losing their brother. We've all been drowning," Lisa Marie Presley wrote. She praised the 2022 film Elvis, which was directed by Baz Luhrmann, as a break from suffering and ray of light that hit us last year. "It made them so proud and honored to be his granddaughters. It made them feel blessed for a moment and less cursed in life. It made us all so proud because it was a true depiction of who he really was." Presley said she did not understand Coppola's need to attempt to take my father down on the heels of such an incredible film, using the excuse that you're trying to tell my mother's story, but from your very dark and jaded reality. So obviously, I don't think it's anyone's place outside of this to tell anyone how they should feel, especially anyone inside the actual situation. I think that's a ridiculous concept to begin with. That being said, as an audience, potentially, if you're planning on seeing it, I do think we have to consider how we're going to see it, I suppose. And I really do think a lot of this is coming from a place of emotion, which is normal, and that's not belittling it, mind you. Just saying that it comes from a place of emotion doesn't mean it doesn't matter and doesn't mean it's not valid. It's just a question of putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes. It's a little bit complicated too, because I haven't seen the other Elvis movie. I'm not an Elvis person. I really do think he was creepy, and I can't really watch anything without forgetting some of what I thought was creepy. It's also a question of, okay, so you're fine with a movie being made about Elvis so long as it is essentially positive and highlighting all the positive things, but you're not okay with a movie about Elvis that's highlighting maybe what the problems were. And I mean, that's completely normal. Everyone prefers compliments over critique. Normal. At what point do we also consider this a historical telling? Now, of course, it being done by Sofia Coppola, it's going to have artistry. It's not a documentary, right? But at the same time, how much can you cut out until it's a completely different story? Putting this on a grander scheme with any type of story that has to do with musicians, oftentimes there's a very grisly side to it. Oftentimes, I can't think of any movie I've seen about musicians, whether we're talking about Queen, who I am a stan of, but you know, like any massive musician, band, artist, whatever, all of the stories we see are typically rather fucked up. Even Elton John, like, it's almost inevitable because these people obviously reach such a level of fame and power that, you know, things happen. I'm not going to go into all of that. So I also feel like it wouldn't necessarily read as realistic to just kind of exclude all the controversy, the issues, the trouble, the tabloids, because how is that not an essential part of the story? So my question then is, how would this have worked? That is my question. And I wish we could have figured that out as well, not just as an audience. Obviously for the film production, I assume it would have made their lives easier, but to figure out how this should have been, according to Lisa Marie Presley, how this should have been executed in order for it to be honest to reality, in her opinion. I'm very curious about that. Anyway, I just hope the grandkids don't end up, you know, quote unquote paying for this or getting trouble for it, because really I think that's one of the most heinous things, like people who are not completely unrelated, but they weren't even alive. So anyway, you guys can let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons as always, and I'll catch you guys next time.